I'll never forget that day. It was supposed to be a celebration, a day of joy, laughter, and love. But instead, it turned into a nightmare. It was my birthday, after all. The day I thought I could rely on the people closest to me. But how wrong I was. Michael, my husband of 8 years, and Julia, my best friend for just as long, made sure I would never forget this particular celebration. I had known Julia for years, since we were both in college. We'd been through everything together, the ups, the downs, and all the in-betweens. Our bond was unshakable, or so I thought. We'd laughed together, cried together, and shared our deepest secrets. She knew everything about me, from my childhood memories to the intimate details of my relationship with Michael. And Michael? He'd grown so close to her over the years that he treated her like family. I thought they were both people I could trust without question. But trust is a fragile thing. And I learned that the hard way. It wasn't just that Julia was my best friend. She was the person I confided in about everything. I told her things about Michael that I would never tell anyone else. The arguments we had, the little quirks he had that drove me crazy, the dreams we shared for our future. I thought sharing these moments with Julia made our friendship stronger. Little did I know, she was using my trust against me. And Michael, he had become so comfortable with her over time that it was almost as if they shared a private language. A bond that I didn't even know existed. The birthday party was supposed to be a simple affair. Michael had insisted on organizing it himself, wanting to make it special for me. I didn't mind. It was a sweet gesture. He asked Julia to help, knowing that she had a knack for planning events. I thought nothing of it. They were both dear to me. So why would I ever think that they were capable of plotting something behind my back? I was happy that they were working together on something so meaningful for me. I thought it showed how much they cared. The night started off perfectly. I walked into the room, and there were balloons, flowers, and my favorite music playing softly in the background. The guests were mingling, laughter filling the air. It felt like a dream come true. Michael looked at me with a smile that I had always loved, the kind of smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Julia was by his side, as usual, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, but I brushed it off as harmless. That was our dynamic. They were always in sync, and I found comfort in that. As the night progressed, the conversation turned to stories from the past. We all reminisced about old times, and I felt the warmth of familiarity surrounding me. It was then that I noticed the way Julia and Michael kept exchanging looks. It was subtle at first, just a glance here and there, but the more I saw it, the more it began to bother me. I shrugged it off, though. I was probably just being paranoid. But as the night wore on, the tension in the room started to build. I couldn't place my finger on it, but something was off. Michael excused himself from the group and whispered something to Julia, his voice low. She nodded, and they both seemed to move toward the center of the room. My stomach twisted, and I felt an odd sense of dread washing over me. What was happening? Was I overthinking this? Then, without warning, Michael stood up. The guests quieted as he raised his glass. He was about to make a toast, I thought. I smiled, ready to hear some heartfelt words, to celebrate this milestone with the people I loved. But the words that came out of his mouth shattered everything. I'd like to publicly announce something, he said, his voice steady, almost too steady. Julia and we've been seeing each other for the past year. Sarah, I'm so sorry, but we're in love. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp, like a knife slicing through my chest. The world seemed to spin, and I couldn't find my breath. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. My first thought was that I had to be hearing things. This couldn't be real. This had to be some sick joke, some twisted prank. But the look on Michael's face, the sincerity in his eyes, told me otherwise. This was real. And suddenly the air in the room felt thick, suffocating. I looked around, desperate for someone to say something, anything to make it stop. But no one did. The guests sat in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. I wanted to scream, to yell at them both, but I couldn't find the words. I was paralyzed, my mind racing, trying to comprehend what was happening. How had I not seen it? How had I not known? Julia's voice broke through the silence then. She tried to speak, but I couldn't hear her. The only thing I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my ears. I excused myself from the room, the floor beneath me suddenly feeling like it was giving way. I needed to escape, to process this, to somehow make sense of the incomprehensible. But my legs felt like lead, and I couldn't make them move fast enough. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, my breath came in short. Sharp gasps. I could feel the tears welling up, but I didn't want to cry. Not yet. I wasn't ready to show weakness. No, I couldn't let them see how much they had hurt me, how much their betrayal had cut me. So instead, I stood there, alone in the darkness, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, to make sense of this. But I knew deep down that no one could help me. This wasn't something anyone could fix. This was something I had to fix myself. In that moment, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. I had been living a lie. The people I loved, the people I trusted, had been playing me for a fool. And worst of all, they had done it on my birthday, in front of everyone I knew. It wasn't just a betrayal of my trust. It was an insult to everything we had built together. Michael and Julia had turned the one day that was supposed to be about me into their public stage for announcing their love affair. But something stirred within me that night. Something I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just the hurt or the anger. It was a sense of cold determination. I wasn't going to let this be the end. No, I was going to make them regret this. I didn't know how yet, but I would figure it out. This wasn't the way my story was going to end. And as I stood there in the darkness, I promised myself one thing. I would make them pay for what they had done. I didn't know when, and I didn't know how, but I knew this wasn't the last time I would see them. The days following the party were a blur. It felt like everything I once knew was flipped upside down, leaving me with nothing but the sharp sting of betrayal. At first, I was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions, anger, disbelief, and an overwhelming sadness. But I quickly realized that giving in to these feelings wouldn't get me anywhere. It wasn't enough to feel hurt or angry. I needed to do something about it. I needed to regain control over my life, my future. And to do that, I had to plan, carefully, silently, and with precision. I had always prided myself on being a calm and logical person. As a lawyer, I had spent years analyzing every angle of a situation before making a move. I had learned how to read people, how to assess risks, and how to take action when the time was right. Michael knew this about me. He knew that when I made up my mind, there was no stopping me. But what he didn't know, what neither he nor Julia knew, was that I had already begun plotting my revenge. And it was going to be much worse for them than they could ever imagine. The first thing I did was disappear, socially speaking. I stopped, responding to their messages, ignored their calls, and stayed away from the places we used to go. I made myself scarce in their lives. Michael must have thought I was just broken, overwhelmed by the affair, that I would eventually come crawling back. Julia probably assumed I was too devastated to do anything. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't sitting idly by. I was researching. I was gathering information. I had access to everything. As a lawyer, I had been privy to Michael's work for years. His law firm was one of the most prestigious in the city, and I knew all about its dealings, its clients, its finances, its connections. I also knew about Julia's real estate empire. She had built a successful business from the ground up, and I had always admired her drive. But now I wasn't just admiring her. I was studying her, learning everything I could about her business practices, her investments, and her personal life. The more I learned, the more I realized how vulnerable they both were. I began digging deeper, quietly tracking their financial transactions. Michael's firm had several high-profile clients, and I knew there were things that could be uncovered if I just looked hard enough. I found some discrepancies in their tax filings, some questionable investments that didn't add up. There were rumors of money laundering, of offshore accounts, but nothing concrete yet. It was like a puzzle that was slowly starting to come together. The pieces were there. I just had to fit them. Julia's empire, too, had cracks. She had always been so confident, so sure of herself. But as I delved into her finances, I found evidence of shady dealings. Some of her properties had been acquired under suspicious circumstances, with documents that didn't quite match up. There were lawsuits pending, creditors breathing down her neck, and a few skeletons buried deep in her past. It was all a web of lies and deceit, and I knew exactly how to expose it. It was the perfect way to bring them both down, destroy their lives the same way they had destroyed mine. But I couldn't rush this. I knew that patience was key. I wasn't going to make any hasty moves or act out of anger. I had to be meticulous, calculating. Every step I took needed to be precise, thought out, and well-timed. Michael and Julia would have no idea what was coming. They would think they were getting away with it, that they had escaped unscathed. But I would be the one to pull the strings behind the scenes. And when I finally revealed what I had uncovered, it would be devastating. I spent days, weeks, poring over documents, making connections, and creating a detailed plan. I made sure everything was backed up, every piece of evidence stored securely. I knew that if I wanted to truly hurt them, I had to make it count. It wasn't just about ruining their careers or their finances. It was about making them feel the weight of what they had done to me. I wanted them to regret every single moment they spent together, every laugh they shared behind my back. The more I worked, the more I realized how far I was willing to go. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. It was about showing the world that I wouldn't let anyone walk all over me. And when I finally made my move, when I exposed Michael and Julia for who they truly were, I would be the one standing tall. They would be the ones broken, destroyed, begging for forgiveness. And I would watch it all unfold from the sidelines, a spectator in my own personal drama. As the days passed, I made my plans with care. I knew exactly when to strike, when to send the first piece of evidence to the media, when to leak the financial documents that would tie Michael's firm to illegal activities. I knew which journalists to trust, which influencers to reach out to. I wasn't just going to destroy their personal lives. I was going to ruin their reputations, make sure they never worked again. I had learned everything about them, everything I needed to make their downfall inevitable. It was only a matter of time before the walls would start to crumble. But even as I plotted, something inside me began to change. At first, the idea of revenge had consumed me. It had become my purpose, my mission. But as I spent more time alone, as I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized something. This wasn't just about getting back at them. It was about reclaiming my power. I didn't need them to validate my worth. I didn't need them to define who I was. I had been a fool to let them control me for so long. Now, I was in control. And that realization, how much stronger I was than I had ever given myself credit for. Gave me the clarity I needed to move forward. I wasn't just doing this for revenge. I was doing it for me. I was doing it to prove that no matter how low they had brought me, I would rise higher. I would be the one to rebuild my life. Piece by piece, stronger and wiser than before. With my plan in motion, I sat back and waited. The world didn't know it yet, but Sarah was about to make her comeback. And when I made my move, no one would ever forget the name Sarah again. I had spent weeks planning, gathering evidence, and now it was time to unleash the storm that would tear their lives apart. I knew where to hit them, and I knew exactly how to make it hurt. Michael's law firm was a prestigious name in the industry, one that everyone looked up to. He had worked so hard to build his career, always boasting about the big clients he represented and the cases he won. He was the golden boy of the legal world, the one everyone trusted. But that was all a facade, a carefully constructed image that hid the truth beneath it. And it was time for that truth to come out. I had already dug deep into the firm's financial records. I had found discrepancies in their tax filings, small, almost unnoticeable errors that could easily be overlooked. But with a little digging, I discovered a pattern of financial mismanagement. There were questionable investments made by the firm, and worse, I found ties to some shady characters, people involved in money laundering, organized crime, and fraud. It wasn't a simple mistake. This was something far bigger. And I had the proof. The documents were incriminating, damning even. I knew that if I leaked them to the right people, it would send shockwaves through the legal world. Michael's career would be ruined in an instant. The firm would collapse, its reputation shattered. The partners would be investigated, disbarred, and possibly even jailed. Michael thought he had it all figured out, that he had protected himself. But he hadn't counted on me. As for Julia, her empire was no less fragile. Her real estate business had been built on promises of luxurious properties and high-end investments. She had always been the picture of success, flaunting her wealth and power. But I had spent weeks uncovering the cracks in her empire. I found evidence of fraudulent transactions, properties bought under false pretenses, and shady dealings with developers who had ties to criminal organizations. I knew that if I could expose this, it would destroy her reputation and bring her entire business crashing down. I reached out to the right people, journalists who had been looking for a big story, influencers with the power to spread the word. I carefully leaked the information, one document at a time, ensuring that every piece of evidence was airtight, undeniable. The first leak hit the news like a bombshell. A financial scandal at Michael's law firm, linked to illegal activities and money laundering. It didn't take long for the media to pick it up, for people to start asking questions. It spread like wildfire, and soon, Michael's once untouchable career was under a microscope. As the scandal unfolded, I watched as Michael's world came crashing down. The firm was forced to make a statement, denying the allegations, but it was clear that they were losing control. Clients started pulling their business, partners distanced themselves, and the phone calls from the media became more frequent. Michael tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the cracks starting to show. He was losing everything, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But that was just the beginning. I hadn't forgotten about Julia. No, her downfall would be even more satisfying. The leaks about her fraudulent properties started making their way into the press. News outlets were quick to jump on the story, exposing her shady dealings and criminal connections. Investors who had once trusted her were now pulling out, scrambling to distance themselves from her empire. Julia tried to fight back, claiming that she was the victim of a smear campaign, but no one was buying it. The truth was out, and it was ugly. I could see the panic in their eyes as everything they had worked for began to unravel. Michael's phone calls became more frantic, his meetings with lawyers more frequent. Julia, once the queen of real estate, was now an outcast, her reputation destroyed in a matter of days. She had no friends left, no business partners to support her. Even her own mother had distanced herself, embarrassed by the scandal. Julia, the woman who had once seemed untouchable, was now begging for forgiveness, but it was too late. The damage was done. And as I watched them crumble, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. They had humiliated me, shattered my world, and now they were paying the price for it. But as their careers and reputations crumbled, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had thought they could destroy me, but instead, they had destroyed themselves. As Michael sat in his office, watching the headlines come in, I could see the realization in his eyes. His firm was finished. His name was mud. All those years of hard work, all those late nights spent building his career, gone in an instant. Julia, too, was staring at the wreckage of her life. She had built her empire on lies, and now the truth was taking it all away. I watched it all, from the sidelines, knowing that this was just the beginning. They had betrayed me, and now they were paying the ultimate price. But even as I reveled in their downfall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had taken away their careers, their reputations, their wealth, but I wasn't sure if that was enough. I had wanted them to feel the full extent of my pain, to understand the depth of their betrayal. And yet, as they fell, I realized something. Their destruction had never been the ultimate goal. It wasn't just about them losing everything, it was about me gaining everything back. And with that realization, I knew I had to take the next step, the final step in my plan. But for now, I could watch as they burned. They had built their lives on lies, and now those lies were coming back, to haunt them. They thought they could get away with it, but they were wrong. I had the power now, and I wasn't about to let it go. The storm that had been building for weeks finally broke, and with it, the chaos that followed. Michael and Julia had tried to keep their lives intact, to salvage what little dignity they had left, but the damage had been done. The scandal didn't just affect their careers. It affected every aspect of their lives. The walls they had built around themselves, the polished images they had worked so hard to maintain, crumbled in an instant. And as the world watched, their personal lives fell apart, piece by piece. It was like something out of a nightmare. The headlines screamed of betrayal, of financial fraud, of the ugly truth that no one could deny anymore. Michael's once untouchable status in the legal world had evaporated, leaving nothing but whispers and pointed fingers. The media pounced on every detail of the scandal, digging into the history of his firm, uncovering more and more evidence of wrongdoing. Lawyers began dropping him, clients fled in droves, and soon, Michael was no longer a respected figure. Was a joke. But it wasn't just his professional life that was under fire. His social circle, once filled with the elite, the powerful, the influential, began to shrink. Friends turned into strangers, and acquaintances quickly distanced themselves. Everyone who had once been so eager to be associated with him now looked at him with disdain. The whispers behind his back were louder than the voices in front of him, and he couldn't escape them. The once coveted invitations to the best parties, the exclusive gatherings, gone. His name was no longer a ticket to the top. It was a scarlet letter. And Julia? Well, she fared no better. Her carefully crafted image as a successful real estate mogul was now in tatters. She had always prided herself on being the queen of the social scene, the woman everyone wanted to know. But in the blink of an eye, she went from being the center of attention to an outcast. Her high-end properties, her luxurious lifestyle, all of it came crashing down. The buyers, investors, and partners who had once flocked to her for business now turned their backs, unwilling to be associated with her name. The social invitations that had once flooded her inbox were replaced with silence. No one wanted to be seen with her, No one wanted to be linked to the woman who had betrayed her closest friend and partner. The exiles came swiftly, almost cruelly. Michael and Julia were no longer welcome in the circles they had once dominated. No one was willing to stand by them. Their wealth, their status, their fame, all of it faded into oblivion, leaving behind only the cold, harsh truth. They had destroyed themselves, and no one was left to pick up the pieces. It was as if the world had collectively turned its back on them, and they had nowhere left to go. They were alone in the wreckage of their own making. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. How quickly the tables had turned. One moment, Michael was the golden boy, the successful lawyer with the world at his feet. Julia was the powerhouse of the real estate world, the woman everyone admired and wanted to be. And now they were nothing. The people who had once praised them, who had fought for their attention, were now walking away, as if they had never mattered in the first place. For me, it was bittersweet. I had planned every step of this downfall. I had orchestrated their disgrace with precision, and it was working perfectly. But as I watched their world crumble, I couldn't help but wonder, had I gone too far? Was this truly what I wanted? Seeing them humiliated, ostracized, cast out of the very world they had built? In the end, it didn't matter. They had betrayed me in the most public way possible, and now they were reaping the consequences of their actions. I still remember the moment when Julia's mother, who had once been one of her strongest supporters, publicly distanced herself from her. The press ate it up. The images of Julia, standing alone, surrounded by reporters asking for answers, made me realize just how far they had fallen. She was no longer the woman who commanded respect. She was the woman everyone pitied. And Michael, well, he was no different. He had lost everything, the respect, the admiration, the friendships. I didn't feel sorry for them. Not for a second. They had taken everything from me, and now they were getting a taste of what it felt like to lose everything in an instant. It was like watching the world burn, and I was standing there, watching it happen, knowing that I had set the fire. Their exiles were swift, but what followed was even worse. The media didn't stop. They kept digging, kept uncovering new secrets, new lies. Michael's and Julia's private lives were torn apart for all to see. Their dirty laundry, their mistakes, their betrayal. It was all laid bare for the world to scrutinize. The social exile that they faced was more than just a professional downfall. It was personal, it was emotional, and it was relentless. They had nowhere to hide anymore. As the days passed, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of triumph. It wasn't just the public shaming that made me feel vindicated. It was the realization that they were no longer the ones with control. They had no power left. They had no friends, no support, no respect. They were pariahs in a world that once worshipped them. And in that moment, I understood something deeper. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about righting the wrongs they had done to me, about showing them that their betrayal had consequences. But the thing about public exile is that it doesn't just affect the people who are cast out. It affects everyone around them too. People started looking at me differently, wondering if I had been a part of the scandal. Some whispered that I was the one who had driven Michael and Julia to such extremes, that I was the one who had destroyed their lives. It was almost as if I had become a part of their disgrace, but I didn't care. I knew the truth. I had been the victim here, and no amount of gossip would change that. Still, as the weeks went by, I found myself reflecting more and more on what had happened. Had I really been justified in tearing their lives apart? Couldn't there have been another way? But every time I questioned myself, I remembered the way they had humiliated me, the way they had thrown me aside without a second thought. They had stolen my trust, my happiness, and now they were paying for it. And as they continued to spiral, As their lives continued to unravel, I realized that this wasn't just their punishment. It was mine too. I had taken control of my life. Again, and I was watching as the pieces fell into place. The power, the revenge, the justice. It was all mine. The final blow came quickly, almost violently. It wasn't just the betrayal that had broken my heart. It was the aftermath. Watching Michael and Julia, the two people who had once been my closest companions, crumble under the weight of their own actions. It was a cruel reminder that love, or what I thought was love, had been nothing but a mirage. Their so-called true love, the one they had been hiding behind my back, was now unraveling in the most public and humiliating way possible. At first, they tried to hold on to what they had, if you could even call it that. The chemistry between them had always been undeniable, even when I had been in the picture. Michael had always looked at Julia differently, like she was someone he could lean on, someone who understood him. They shared a connection that, in hindsight, felt like it was always there, right under the surface, waiting to break free. And break free it did, but not in the way they imagined. When the dust settled from the public scandal, they found themselves bound together by nothing more than their shared guilt and the wreckage they had caused. Their once passionate affair was now nothing but a crumbling foundation, unable to withstand the weight of their lies and mistakes. They had built a world on deceit, and that world had come crashing down, leaving them with nothing but empty promises and broken hearts. I watched as their so-called love began to wither in front of my eyes. Julia, always so self-assured, so confident in her ability to manipulate situations, suddenly became a shell of her former self. The woman who had once commanded attention, who had made everyone believe that her love for Michael was pure, was now crying in her apartment, isolated and alone. She couldn't fix what she had broken, and deep down, she knew it. The guilt gnawed at her, but it was nothing compared to the realization that Michael had begun to see her for what she truly was, a woman who had destroyed everything for selfish gain. Michael, too, was starting to crumble. His career was over, his wealth was slipping away, and now he had to face the woman he had left behind for Julia. The truth was, he never really knew what he wanted. He had been caught between two worlds, his marriage to me and the affair with Julia. But now, as the pieces of his life fell apart, he saw the cracks in his relationship with her. Julia was no longer the woman he had idealized. She was no longer the perfect partner he had fallen for. She was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in his life. He had chosen her over me, over everything we had built together, and now that choice seemed meaningless. The screaming matches became more frequent. Michael would storm into Julia's apartment, furious at her for the mess they were in, for the damage they had caused. He would accuse her of ruining his life, of making him look like a fool in front of the whole world. And Julia, for her part, would lash out, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong, for not being the man she thought he was. The arguments were ugly, filled with venom and anger. They weren't lovers anymore. They were two people caught in a toxic, broken relationship that had no future. They were stuck, trapped in a never-ending cycle of blame and regret. It was heartbreaking, in a way, to watch them struggle. They had once been the perfect couple, or so it seemed. They had been the ones everyone admired, the ones everyone thought had it all. And now, they were nothing. The love they had once shared was now tainted by guilt, shame, and the aftermath of their actions. The truth was, neither of them could escape the fact that they had destroyed my world, and in doing so, had destroyed their own. As their relationship continued to crumble, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. It wasn't enough for me that they had lost everything professionally and socially. I needed to see their personal lives unravel as well. I needed them to understand the true cost of their betrayal. But as I watched them fall apart, I began to realize something unexpected. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had imagined. Watching their pain, seeing them fall apart, it wasn't the victory I had hoped for. Instead, it made me question everything. Had my revenge been worth it? Had I really gained anything by seeing them suffer? I had spent so much time focusing on making them pay, on seeing them fall from grace, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I was losing in the process. Watching them hurt didn't bring me peace. It didn't bring me closure. It only reminded me of the love I had once shared with Michael, the friendship I had once cherished with Julia. Their relationship, built on lies and deceit, was doomed from the start. They had never truly known what love was. They had been blinded by their own desires, by the thrill of betrayal. But now, as they screamed at each other, as they fought over the wreckage of their own hearts, I saw that they had lost something far more valuable than anything they had ever had together. They had lost themselves. For me, watching them fall apart was a stark reminder that revenge, no matter how sweet it seemed, didn't heal the wounds of the past. The pain of their betrayal still lingered, and seeing them suffer didn't take it away. It only reminded me of everything I had lost. But as I watched them tear each other apart, I realized that I was no longer the woman I used to be. I had changed. I had become someone stronger, someone who could rise above the chaos they had caused. Their relationship had crumbled. But in its ashes, I found a new beginning. For me. In the quiet aftermath of everything that had transpired, I stood at a crossroads. My revenge had been carried out to perfection. Michael and Julia had lost everything. Their careers, their reputations, their wealth, all of it was in ruins. And yet, in the solitude of my own mind, a strange sense of emptiness began to settle in. The satisfaction I had once anticipated, the triumph I had craved, didn't come the way I had expected. As I reflected on the past few months, on everything I had done, I realized that I had transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated. For so long, I had thought of myself as the victim. Michael and Julia had taken everything from me, and in my desire for revenge, I had clung to the idea that bringing them down would somehow heal my wounds. But it didn't. Watching them suffer, seeing them beg for forgiveness, didn't make me feel powerful. It didn't make me feel whole. Instead, it made me question the person I had become. I had started this journey driven by anger, fueled by the need to make them pay for what they had done. I had been consumed by the idea of revenge, believing that it would restore the balance of power. And in many ways it had. Michael and Julia were destroyed, and I had reclaimed control over my life. But somewhere along the way, I realized that my true victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in the strength I had found within myself. I had always been a fighter, but I had never truly understood the depth of my own resilience. In the face of betrayal, I had fought to keep my dignity intact, to rise above the hurt. But what I didn't see at the time was that the journey wasn't just about taking revenge. It was about reclaiming my sense of self. I had been so focused on making them suffer that I had lost sight of what truly mattered, my own peace, my own future. As I looked back on the years I had spent with Michael and Julia, I realized that I had allowed them to define me. I had allowed their actions to dictate my happiness, my sense of worth. They had convinced me that my happiness was dependent on their loyalty, on their love. But now I saw that I had always had the power to define my own path. I had always been stronger than I gave myself credit for. In the quiet moments, when the dust had settled and the world had moved on, I found myself reflecting on what I wanted for the future. The bitterness of the past still lingered, but I knew that I couldn't carry it with me forever. I had built my life around revenge, but now I was ready to build something else, something of my own. Something that wasn't tainted by the darkness of betrayal. The triumph, I realized, wasn't in the destruction of others. It was in my ability to rise above it all. Michael and Julia had thought they could break me, that they could steal everything from me. But they were wrong. In the end, I had become stronger, wiser, and more in control of my own destiny. I had learned to let go of the past, to forgive myself for the role I had played in allowing their betrayal to happen. But forgiveness wasn't easy. It didn't come overnight. There were still days when the memories would resurface, the hurt, the anger, the sense of betrayal. And on those days, I would remind myself that I had come out on the other side. I had survived. I had thrived. And in that, I found my triumph. The truth was, I had transformed. Not just in the way I viewed Michael and Julia, but in the way I viewed myself. I was no longer the woman who had been defined by their actions. I was no longer the woman who had allowed her happiness to be dictated by others. I was someone new. Someone who had found her strength, her voice, and her independence. And as I stood there, looking ahead to the future, I realized that I had everything I needed. I had learned the hard way that revenge, while sweet, doesn't fill the emptiness inside. It's the journey of self-discovery, the rebuilding of one's life, that brings true satisfaction. The triumph wasn't in their destruction. It was in the new life I was building for myself, one step at a time. In the end, I wasn't just the victim. I was the survivor, the warrior, the woman who had taken back her power. And as I looked forward to whatever the future held, I knew that nothing, no one, could ever take that away from me again. The first step in rebuilding was accepting the fact that I had been changed forever. I wasn't the woman I had been before the betrayal. I wasn't the naive, trusting person who had once believed in the goodness of others. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I had learned so much about myself, about my own strength, my own resilience. I wasn't going to let what had happened define me. I was going to redefine myself on my own terms. The journey to rebuilding wasn't easy. It meant facing the uncomfortable truth that I had been consumed by anger for far too long. But it also meant embracing the freedom that came with letting go. I had spent so many years carrying around the weight of betrayal, but now I was ready to release it. Holding on to the past wasn't going to get me anywhere. The only way to move forward was to leave behind everything that no longer served me. One of the most freeing things I did was walk away from the life I had known. I didn't need to stay in the same city, in the same apartment, surrounded by the reminders of everything I had lost. I sold my old place, moved into a new home, and started fresh. It wasn't just about a change of scenery. It was about a change of mindset. I wasn't going to let the past dictate where I was going. I was going to take control of my own destiny. But rebuilding wasn't just about the physical things. It was about finding my sense of purpose again. I had always been passionate about helping others, about making a difference in people's lives. But in the years of betrayal and heartbreak, I had lost sight of that. I had become so focused on what I had lost that I forgot about what I could give. I began to volunteer, to work with businesses that needed help rebuilding after economic setbacks. It wasn't just about giving back. It was about finding fulfillment in helping others rise from the ashes, just as I had. And that's when something incredible happened. I began to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten. I found joy in the little things, working late into the night on a new project, laughing with people who didn't know my past, and realizing that I could still make an impact in this world, despite everything that had happened. I was building something new, something stronger than what had come before. It was my second chance, and I was determined to make the most of it. As I helped businesses rebuild, I started to see that there was more to life than just surviving. There was living, and I was living again. I was no longer just a victim of circumstances, a woman defined by her past. I was a creator, a builder, someone who could not only rise from the wreckage, but help others do the same. I had learned how to forgive, not for their sake, but for my own. Holding on to anger and resentment wasn't worth it anymore. I had outgrown that version of myself. The woman I had become was someone who could build a future from the ground up, no matter how many times life knocked me down. And somewhere along the way, I met someone who reminded me that there was still love to be found in the world. Matthew was different from the men I had known before. He didn't want anything from me. He didn't need me to fix him or heal him. He was whole on his own. We connected over shared passions, over the joy of building something new. And in him, I found not just a partner, but a reminder that life could still be beautiful, even after everything I had been through. Matthew didn't see me as a victim, nor did he try to save me. He saw me for who I had become, a woman who had taken control of her own destiny. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, heard, and valued. We built a life together, brick by brick, just as I had rebuilt myself. The past was no longer a chain holding me back. It was just a chapter in a story that was still unfolding. And as I stood there, watching the sunset with Matthew by my side, I realized that I had finally found peace. It wasn't the kind of peace I had expected, not the kind that came from watching Michael and Julia suffer. No, the peace I had found was different. It was the kind that came from within, from knowing that I had overcome the worst and emerged, stronger than before. I had rebuilt not just my life, but myself. And in that, I had found something more valuable than revenge. I had found freedom.